At 0317 local time, a single radar contact appeared on the surface plot inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Bataan. It was moving southwest to the central channel of the Strait of Hormuz at 14 knots, hugging the Omani traffic separation lane, broadcasting no AIS transponder signal. Within 90 seconds, two more contacts materialized behind it, staggered at 600-meter intervals. The watch officer on duty noted the formation geometry, cross-referenced it against known Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy patrol patterns, and made a call up the chain. Within 4 minutes, the strike group's air warfare commander had repositioned an MH-60 or Seahawk to establish visual identification. What the helicopter crew observed was not a provocation. It was not a confrontation. It was 3 IRGC fast attack craft turning back toward Bandar Abbas before they had even reached the midpoint of the strait. They had come to test the geometry, and the geometry had already answered. Most of what circulated publicly in the hours that followed told a simple story. The United States had reinforced its naval presence in the Persian Gulf. Warships moved in. Iran backed down. Analysts on cable news described it as a show of force, a flexing of military muscle designed to remind Tehran, who controls the waterway. And on the surface, that framing made sense. Carrier strike groups are visible. Amphibious ready groups are visible. Destroyers transiting in column formation are visible. But what made the IRGC boats turn around that night was not what they could see on the surface. It was what they could not see underneath it. And that distinction between the visible posture and the invisible architecture is where the real story begins. Because the question no one was asking in public was the only question that mattered inside the IRGC's operational planning cells. What else had the Americans moved into the strait that they had not announced? The visible layer was substantial enough on its own. The Bataan Amphibious Ready Group had entered the Gulf of Oman roughly 72 hours earlier, accompanied by the dock landing ship USS Carter Hall and the transport dock USS Mesa Verde. Together, these 3 ships carried approximately 4,000 Marines from a 26 Marine Expeditionary Unit, along with a full complement of AV, 8B Harriers, MV, 22 Ospreys, and attack helicopters. Their stated mission was freedom of navigation and regional stability. In practical terms, their presence gave the United States the ability to project force ashore on either side of the strait within hours, not days. Simultaneously, at least 2 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers were operating independently in the strait itself, each carrying up to 96 vertical launch cells loaded with a mix of Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, SM-2 and SM-6 surface-to-air interceptors, and ESSM point defense rounds. A single destroyer of this class can engage threats across a 350 nautical mile radius. 2 of them operating in coordinated sectors effectively blanketed the entire eastern Persian Gulf with overlapping fires coverage. And behind them, operating from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Thumraid in Oman, and Al Dhafra in the United Arab Emirates, squadrons of F-35A Lightning IIs, F-15E Strike Eagles, and KC-135 Stratotankers maintained a persistent rotation of combat air patrols. The air picture alone was overwhelming, but it was also entirely expected. Tehran has spent 2 decades planning for exactly this kind of American posture. The IRGC's entire anti-access strategy in the Strait of Hormuz was designed not to defeat the U.S. Navy in open water. They know they cannot, but to impose costs so severe that Washington would hesitate to act. The doctrine is built around saturation. Fast attack craft armed with Chinese-derived C-802 anti-ship missiles. Shore-based launchers concealed in hardened tunnels along the Iranian coastline. Swarms of small boats loaded with explosives, operating in clusters of 20 or 30 at a time, designed to overwhelm the targeting capacity of even the most advanced Aegis combat system. Iran also maintains a stockpile of naval mines. Estimates range from 2,000 to 5,000, including modern EM. 52 rocket-propelled rising mines capable of sitting dormant on the seabed and activating autonomously when a ship passes overhead. The strait itself is only 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point, and the navigable shipping channels are considerably narrower, compressed into 2 lanes each roughly 2 miles across, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. At those distances, even an unguided weapon becomes dangerous. And at those volumes, even the best offenses face a math problem. The cost of a single SM-2 interceptor runs approximately $2.5 million. The cost of a single IRGC fast boat loaded with a warhead runs perhaps $40,000. When one side can throw 100 threats at the price it costs the other side to stop 5, the equation begins to fracture. That structural imbalance is the centerpiece of Iran's deterrence logic. And for years it worked, but something shifted. The vulnerability Iran had always counted on exploiting. The numerical mismatch between cheap offensive threats and expensive defensive interceptors assumed that the United States would fight the Strait battle the same way it had always postured for it. Surface ships absorbing attacks, aircraft responding from standoff range, and commanders accepting a certain level of risk to keep the waterway open. What changed was not the number of American ships. It was the type of warfare being waged beneath the surface, in the electromagnetic spectrum, and in the targeting architecture that connected every American asset into a single integrated kill web. Rear Admiral Catherine Fraser, reportedly overseeing the combined task force operations on Batan's flag bridge, had at her disposal something Iran's coastal defense planners had never fully accounted for: the Navy's cooperative engagement capability, a network system that allows any sense in the battle group to pass targeting data to any shooter in real time, had been upgraded and expanded across the entire force package. This meant that an F-35 flying at 43,000 feet over the Gulf of Oman could detect a shore-based missile launcher warming up on the Iranian coast, pass that track instantaneously to a destroyer 60 miles away, and have a Tomahawk in the air before the Iranian crew had finished their launch sequence. The time between detection and response had collapsed from minutes to seconds, and the Iranians had no equivalent system. Their command and control architecture still relied heavily on ground-based communication relays, many of which had already been mapped, cataloged, and assigned to the electronic warfare suppression plan that a specialist team aboard one of the destroyers, likely led by a senior electronic warfare officer, a commander with years of signals intelligence experience in this exact theater, had been refining for weeks before the task force even entered the strait. This is where Iran's structural problem deepened. The IRGC's swarm doctrine depends on coordination. Dozens of fast boats must receive attack orders simultaneously, converge on a single target from multiple axes, and time their approach to arrive within the same narrow window so that defensive systems cannot engage them sequentially, disrupt the communication layer, jam the frequencies, spoof the GPS signals, inject false commands into network, and the swarm does not just degrade, it collapses. Each boat becomes an individual, uncoordinated unit operating on last known orders with no ability to adapt. The Americans had not simply brought more firepower to the strait. They had brought the means to dismantle the architecture that made Iran's firepower effective. And they had done so quietly, without announcing a single element of the electronic warfare package in any public statement or Pentagon briefing. There was another layer still. Beneath the surface of the strait, operating in near total silence, at least one Virginia-class fast attack submarine was holding position in the approaches to Bandar Abbas. A Virginia-class boat carries 12 vertical launch tubes for Tomahawk missiles in addition to 4 torpedo tubes capable of firing Mark 48 ADCAP heavyweight torpedoes, weapons with an effective range of over 27 miles and a terminal speed exceeding 55 knots. But the submarine's most important contribution was not its weapons. It was its ears. The boat's sonar suite, combined with towed array sensors that trail hundreds of meters behind the hull, could detect Iranian submarine movements, mine-laying operations, and even the acoustic signatures of fast attack boats staging in port. Every time an IRGC Goddard-class midget submarine attempted to sortie from its pen, the Virginia-class boat knew. Every time a mine-laying vessel loaded ordnance at a naval pier, the acoustic profile changed, and that change is recorded, analyzed, and passed up the chain. The Iranians were preparing to fight a battle in which the enemy already knew their order of battle, their staging positions, and their launch timelines. They simply did not realize it yet. That was the visible layer of the invisible architecture. But the real pressure sat underneath even that. The arrival of the American force package in the strait coincided with something far less dramatic but operationally decisive. International shipping insurers, The companies that underwrite the massive tankers carrying crude oil to the Hormuz corridor had quietly begun adjusting their risk premiums based on private intelligence assessments. When the U.S. Navy is present in force, premiums stabilize. When the IRGC conduct provocative intercepts, premiums spike. And when premiums spike, the cost of moving Iranian oil, already constrained by sanctions, climbs further. Tehran's petroleum exports, the single artery sustaining its economy and its ability to fund proxy operations across the region, become marginally less competitive with every incident. The IRGC's own aggressive posture in the Strait was not just a military liability. It was an economic one. And the American presence had turned that liability into a trap. The more Iran escalated, the more it damaged its own revenue. The less it escalated, the more it conceded operational control of the waterway. There was no version of its geometry that favored Tehran. Commander Darren Holt, an intelligence officer embedded with the task force's planning cell, had reportedly mapped this dynamic weeks before deployment. The assessment was straightforward. Iran could still inflict damage. It could still launch a saturation attack that would cost American lives and sink or disable at least one vessel. But it could not do so without triggering a response that would dismantle its entire coastal defense infrastructure within 72 hours, and without simultaneously collapsing the insurance framework that kept its oil revenue viable. The cost-exchange ratio had flipped. For years, Iran had held the mathematical advantage. Cheap threats against expensive defenses. Now the calculus ran in the other direction. A single American strike on the communication nodes linking IRGC coastal batteries would neutralize hundreds of millions of dollars in Iranian military investment in a matter of minutes, using weapons that cost a fraction of what they destroyed. This is what the three fast attack boats encountered at 0317 that morning. Not just warships, not just aircraft, not just radar coverage. They encountered a system, layered, networked, silent in its most dangerous dimensions, that had already mapped their route, predicted their behavior, and prepared a response architecture they could not see, could not jam, and could not outrun. The decision to turn back was not cowardice. It was recognition. The geometry of the strait had changed beneath their feet, and no amount of Revolutionary Guard rhetoric could alter the physics of what was now in the water, in the air, and in the spectrum around them. What matters now is not just the positioning of ships. It is a signal that this kind of invisible dominance sends to every actor watching the strait, from Beijing's naval strategists to Moscow's energy analysts to the insurance underwriters in London recalculating risk tables in real time. The Strait of Hormuz remains the most consequential choke point on the planet. 21% of global petroleum consumption passes through it every day. And for the first time in over a decade, the balance of control in that corridor has shifted in a way that Iran cannot answer with speed, volume, or numbers. Alone, the swarm doctrine is not dead, but the conditions that made it viable are eroding, and the force that eroded them did not arrive with fanfare. It arrived in silence, beneath the surface, inside the spectrum, embedded in the network architecture, connecting every American sensor to every American weapon across 1,000 miles of ocean. The visible posture was the ships. The real posture was the system behind them. And until Iran finds a way to see what it cannot currently detect, the strait belongs to a force that operates in the layers no one talks about. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what is really happening in the world's most dangerous waterway, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next analysis. Hit the like button. It makes a difference. And check the video on screen now for the strategic situation most people are still overlooking.